Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today, especially to those in our audience. And for Police Chief Harvey, we're always happy to have you here. And to our council members. We're going to go ahead and start with our roll call for our general government meeting.
Councilmember Dorito.
Here.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Here.
Councilmember Hamrick.
Here.
Councilmember Jaquez.
Here.
Councilmember Meisner.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Mayor Troutman is absent.
Okay, first thing on the agenda is we're going to be speaking with Police Chief Harvey on department overview and police vacancies. So go ahead and turn the time over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, for allowing me this opportunity to brag on our police department. That's essentially what I'm going to do tonight, and tell you a little bit more about the department, get a little bit into the details of how the police department functions and some of the things that we do, both from an administrative piece as well as from the officers who are actually in the field responding to calls for service. So I put this up here. Our department, that's one of the things I'm very proud of, has a very illustrious history. We have pictures as far back as the early 70s, and you can see obviously from back then and then today. The police car is pretty much the main mode. They had push bumpers back then, and we still have push bumpers today. So there's a lot of similarities, even back in those days. Clearly, this is posed. The caption at the police department is "Stars of Jupiter." I don't really know what that means, but anyway, so it's on our wall, along with a lot of other photographs about our history. So the police department, whether you know it or not, was actually founded or created in April of 1872. We currently don't have it actually listed in the charter, and the actual ordinance of creation we haven't been able to find yet. The only way that we have it, so pretty much I'm a rogue operation, Tony. The only way that we know that it was April of 1872 of when it was created is based on newspaper archives that actually showed in April that City Council held a meeting and formally created the police department pretty much, I think, a month after the city itself incorporated. So initially, Canyon was broken down into several different parts, with the last part really becoming incorporated and becoming the current incorporated limits of Canyon City in 1959. There was both an East Canyon, a South Canyon, and from what I believe, a North Canyon. All of those combined to actually become what we know today as Canyon City. So the police department inherited some of those other police departments, and they all merged to become our modern Canyon City Police Department. This is something that's remarkable, and I have never worked for any agency where this is true, and I have dug and dug both with our archives as well as with news reports. The Canyon City Police Department has no unsolved homicides within its incorporated limits. In the roughly 47-year history, we have no recorded unsolved homicides. That's hard to believe, but it's a testament to the hard work that our folks do and how far we're willing to go to make sure that, especially when something disastrous happens within the city, that we take care of it. Now, in the unincorporated areas of the county, that's not the case. Something else as far as history that I think bears remembrance is the last time we actually received a full-time officer increase was in 2007, and the purpose of that increase was to create a traffic unit, which unfortunately is no longer in existence. So just an overview of our money situation. Our approved budget for 2018 was $4,359,132, and notice I counted every one of those dollars. I need them. So, but we're not only are we trying to be fiscally responsible, but we're looking for opportunities to be able to help offset some of those costs to the taxpayers. And these are a number of grants that we are talking with or have already attained in partnership with the Finance Department to help offset some of these things. The Colorado Department of Transportation grant is the one that just paid for the MDTs. We got signed roughly last week. The Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Alliance will pay for, remember I told you the computers are the staple or stake for all other technology. A license plate reader, a police officer can be driving down the road. It takes pictures of tags, and if there's a stolen car or a wanted person, it tells us that vehicle is associated with a crime or is actually stolen. Now that grant we haven't obtained yet, and I'm still waiting on news from the state about that, but we have talked with finance about it. Some of these other ones we've been getting for a number of years. And the Colorado Post Education Training Fund, roughly $5,000 from the state to help offset some of the mandatory continuing education requirements that I'll talk about a little bit later. And the Colorado Post Special Projects Fund is one that is a zero match, and both CATPA, which is what this is referenced as, and the Post Special Projects Fund are zero match from the city, whether it's hard cash or in-kind contributions. That's just money that we're getting. So again, that's not something we've received yet, but that's going to help, obviously, with the building donation that we received and some of those expenses associated with it. And I only included 2018, but we have a very generous community when it comes to the police department. So our canine program, as many of you may know, we are trying to expand. Currently, we only have 1 dog, but we are trying to expand that into 2 and possibly even 3. And the program was initially instituted in 2014. Well, since 2014, the citizens of Canyon City have donated roughly around $43,000 towards the canine program. So even though it only shows $1,300 here, that's not completely or wholly reflective of what the community has actually done to help support us. The Fremont Interoperability Oversight Group, roughly about $1,500, helps us offset the cost of National Night Out, which is one of our community outreach funds. Our budget is very tight, and so outreach efforts we have to be very, very streamlined with, so that way we can continue those. A bulletproof vest program from the JAG Burn Grant, that only covers about 50%, but at least offsets some of the cost of the $850 bulletproof vest we have to purchase for every officer. And then the Violence Against Women's Act, Victims of Crime Act, Walmart local funds, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation field APHIS machines. Those are the handheld fingerprint readers I was telling you about. Now, that's not a cash donation that would come to the city. That would be a piece of equipment. And then finally, we also searched the Department of Homeland Security Equipment Assistance Grant for vehicles and other things that we might be able to apply, and those grants are substantial. So hopefully, you know, that will work out well. And then finally, we look at military surplus property. So before we actually go out and try and buy something new, the military, especially having Fort Carson right here next to us and the Air Force Academy, if there's a piece of equipment that we can acquire for a minimal cost or no cost from the military that will meet our need, we try and do that rather than bringing a budget request to other staff and then finally to council. So our current personnel allocation is 5 command staff, which includes me, my deputy chief, an operations commander, a support services commander, and an administrative sergeant. Now, each one of these folks has a different function, and we actually just recently realigned the duties. The deputy chief helps me with budgeting issues and general policy. Operations is the person who oversees what happens to the uniform patrol folks. So when you call 911, he would be the final authority essentially on uniform patrol. So those folks answer to him. And that's Commander Robert Hill, my deputy chief Alan Cooper, I think all of you know. And then my support services commander is Tamara Wagner. She's responsible for some of the administrative functions that the administrative sergeant is either not at the right level to do or requires more of a budgeting and policy approval standpoint. So training, schedules, hiring and recruiting, so she's going to be an integral part of that as we talk about that a little bit later. And actually coordinating with HR some of those processes to make sure that there's regular communication between HR and the police department and that we are actively out recruiting so we don't get into this hiring situation again.
She also handles investigations.
Yes, she also is over investigations. So, and previously that fell under the deputy chief. And so I'll talk about investigations here just a little bit as a good segue. It's made up of 5 people, which is a sergeant who actually acts as a supervisor and a detective, and 2 general assignment. And what I mean by general assignment is no matter what the case is, those 2 detectives follow it up. So whether it's a car break-in or a homicide, those 2 detectives will be the ones working it. As one of the concerns that we have both from the community as well as what we're seeing on the street is narcotics. Narcotics is a big issue all across southern Colorado, not just in our community. But we have currently allocated, and this is one of the positions that's currently vacant. Actually, One of the general detectives is currently vacant, and one of the narcotics detectives is currently vacant. So technically, right now, we only have 3 people in investigations. But those folks are assigned to the FBI Safe Streets Task Force, and which gives them federal authority as deputized U.S. Marshals to be able to not only follow criminal enterprises and narcotics dealers locally, but if they're coming from Pueblo or Colorado Springs. We had a case recently that unfortunately I'm not able to say right now because of the public environment, but it was a person that was in our community for over a decade, not only committing violent crimes, heinous violent crimes, but also dealing narcotics and adding to the general disorder that we had, who is now looking at 10 years in federal prison because of the assignment of this individual to the FBI Safe Streets Task Force. We also have 2 school resource officers, and those resource officers typically have been the enforcement arm of the police department to focus on issues specific to the schools. What we were trying to do is balance that program to where any safety issues or enforcement issues, criminal violations that occur at the school district or on school property, they are responsible for, but they are also responsible for trying to prevent those things from occurring. That's the same thing with patrol. We're trying to shift that to a more preventative, proactive focus rather than simply being responsive. So in the patrol division, we currently have 6 sergeants, and these are allotted positions, not necessarily just vacant. 6 sergeants, 2 corporals, 17 officers, and a canine officer. Now, our current schedule that we are unfortunately going to have to go away from because of the vacancies is a 10-hour shift. So essentially, each side of the week has a supervisor. There are 3 supervisors on each side, and they cover 3 different shifts. Clearly, 10 hours isn't 24 hours, and so we have overlaps there. And then at certain days of the week, we have overlaps between both sides of the week, which is how we had been accomplishing our training. It was really positively received by the officers. It has really excelled or propelled our training program of officers, which leads to job satisfaction as well as efficiency out on the street. And then on the days that they were not training, we were giving them special assignments. So some of the property crimes that we've been having, the narcotics issues, Rudd Park, that I'm sure many of you remember the operation that we did in Rudd Park that somewhat has changed the dynamic of it, and it's been, from what I was told, Rudd Park had those issues for at least 10 years prior to that operation. And so this is really, this schedule has allowed us to be able to change some of the dynamics of the community and not only be responsive, but also proactive on some of these issues. So in 2017, officers responded to 31,305 calls for service. So that's people picking up the phone and calling 911 or calling the non-emergency number because something happened at their location. With the amount of officers that we have, that's 1,204 calls per officer. That doesn't allow a whole lot of time for them to be able to be proactive. And so the schedule that we had was a way to manage those resources, but then also allow them to be a little bit more proactive. Because typically when they're answering calls and they're on shift, they don't have a whole lot of time. And obviously our population by 2016 census is 16,607, which if you look at just the patrol division is an officer ratio of 1.46 per 1,000 residents. So some of the specialty functions that we have to incorporate or address all the different needs that our community could incur is a joint SWAT team that not only is with the Kansas City Police Department, but also with Florence and Fremont County Sheriff's Office. We don't have anybody in a leadership position in that unit currently, but I have asked the current sheriff about, we definitely have some people that are qualified and able to fulfill those roles, and I want our people to be able to grow and have a greater say in how the SWAT team is not only trained, but utilized. We do, this past year, we picked up an individual who has had considerable training in marijuana enforcement, and so we're trying to expand that function because we do have some gray market and actual black market grows within the city, and we're exploring those opportunities on how we can more effectively get them out of the city to where they are regulated in other places, especially since there's a prohibition on it here. I already talked about the FBI task force, our school resource officers, our canine. This is not him, by the way. And then our bike patrol unit. So we actually have officers that are able to ride mountain bikes not only on trails where that's allowed, but then also in the downtown corridor and actually on city streets as an alternative form of vehicular patrol. We haven't used these a whole lot, but we have, it's essentially a dirt bike, for lack of a better explanation. It's called an Enduro, which I believe is electronically driven. But we do have the ability to be able to patrol in rural areas, hogbacks in that area. Should we need a vehicle to get back there, we have two Enduro motorcycles that would get us back there. And finally, our terrorism liaison. So we send individuals, and you know, one of the things I forgot to put up here is crime analysis. That's a new function that we just did this past year as well. And that ties hand in hand with terrorism liaison because the terrorism liaison is connected to the Colorado Information and Analysis Center. So any information that comes from within the state or outside the state goes to this central location that then gets disseminated out to the terrorism liaisons for areas that are affected by it. Our demographics somewhat mirror, believe it or not, 15% female is higher than most agencies, not only in Colorado, but in the nation. Most agencies are in single digits with gender equality. And we're still trying to recruit more qualified, diverse applicants, whether it's gender or ethnicity. Our ethnicity breakdown also mirrors our community, but it is not very diverse. 96% Caucasian, 2% Native American, and 2% Hispanic. So police officers have not only what we go by in Colorado statute and actually enforce, we also have regulations that tell us what we can and can't do and how we are supposed to be structured. These are some of those rules. So the authority for police officers statewide actually comes from the Colorado Attorney General, and so the regulatory authority for all police officer certifications is through a subgroup or subcommission of the Attorney General, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. They develop rules that not only talk about backgrounds, but also hiring practices. They actually have a list, and I'll talk about it here in just a minute, as far as automatic disqualifiers for who can never be a police officer. And they give us some of that guidance. These other statutes also help give us some guidance on who's allowed to be a police officer and who's not just our local policies and regulations. So Title 16 of Colorado Revised Statute actually establishes the definition of a police officer and outlines some of the duties as well as some of the mechanisms that officers are able to accomplish their functions. U.S. and Colorado Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment, gives us great guidance through case law as far as what powers we have, how we can enforce those, everything from use of force to actually entering a building and asking someone not to leave. We have our municipal ordinances that guide our enforcement action, and then this gets into more of our local situation. We are a state accredited agency, and so the state accreditation standards give us guidance or regulations. The reason why we have a year-long probationary period for police officers, where we may not have that same length of probationary tenure in the water department or other places, is because not only is it statutory in some respects, but it is a state standard by our accrediting body that says police officers should be on probation for a year. So these are some of the things that make police departments uniquely different. And I think that's really what the purpose of this discussion today was, is to talk about how are police departments different from other divisions or functions within the city. Our agency policy actually comes from, it's separate from actual city policy. It was a system that was purchased prior to me getting here called Lexipol, which is a national company that actually gives policy processes to police departments that's vetted not only by attorneys. It was founded by an attorney who is also a police officer, but they give different guidance and update policies as they come out. So if a case law changed the regulations of what a police officer can do, shortly thereafter our agency policy through Lexipol would give us an update of this search process is no longer lawful. This internal investigation process or internal disciplinary process for a police officer was overturned, and so this policy is now changed. So that's part of the reason why the police department has a separate policy from city policy, because there are unique circumstances for police officers that don't apply to other departments. So some of those qualifications, and this is what we list, this comes from not only statute or post requirements, but high school diploma, these are minimums. High school diploma, you must be a Colorado resident and a Colorado licensed driver. You must have a Colorado police officer certification or a provisional certification. First aid and CPR, you must be a U.S. citizen, and successful completion of a medical and psychological test. There's also a background that we do, but I'll tell you a little bit more about our process and how it was developed in a little bit. So some of those automatic disqualifiers are any felony convictions. So if you've been convicted of a felony, even if it's a property crime, you're not eligible to be a police officer. There are also 43 misdemeanors, and I don't want to bore you too much with them, but criminal use of an illegal substance, official misconduct, harassment, there are a number of them that are on there that if you have a conviction as a misdemeanor, you cannot be a police officer. The state will not certify you to be one. Any hard drug use within the past 10 years is best practice, and a dishonorable military discharge. Now, there's a few others in there as well, but these are the big ones. And part of that with dishonorable military discharge is you are not able to possess a firearm. So there are some of those things that if they are disqualifiers from some of the essential functions of a police department, you cannot be a police officer. And so as we are doing this development of an applicant list, we get people that apply that don't know that, or that have a misdemeanor harassment conviction and don't realize that they cannot be a police officer. Educational institutions will often allow them to go through the basic police academy, but then when it comes to certification, they're not allowed to be certified by the state and therefore can't be employed. So some of that entry-level training, and this is part of the reason why it takes so long to get new officers, is we have actually 4 basic police officer academies that operate within our region. Pikes Peak Community College and Pueblo Community College are open to the public, and they run roughly $10,000 per applicant per academy. So we had a cadet program. We still do have a cadet currently. And part of the difficulty with that is obviously with so many different needs to administer the department that cost money, we were trying to find ways to be able to do that for free. And so, and the reason why this is important is that my success in a different part of Colorado with hiring practices is to find people that are already living here, people that have our values, the right character set, that are invested in our community, enjoy our way of life, already potentially live here. Those are the people that are going to be invested in this department and invested in this community and stay longer term. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually do the hiring process. So we reached out to the Pueblo Police Department in Colorado Springs, but because of their staffing shortages, Pueblo Police Department was the only one that was able to give us a spot in their police academy. And we actually hired somebody recently, and he is actually attending the Pueblo Police Academy now with an expected graduation date in August. That's 4.5 months to even get him in there, aside from all of the things that I talked about before to actually even qualify. Then once they get out, the field training program takes roughly about 4 months. Now what field training is you learn how to do arrest control, you learn the law, you learn how to drive fast, you learn how to shoot, but then you come to the Canyon City Police Department and we have policies and procedures we expect you to follow. We have community cultural norms that we expect you to uphold and abide by. Not only that, we're a little bit more stringent on the field training side than some academies are. Now, I think Pueblo Police Department is a pretty stringent academy, and that's the one that we're sending folks to. But nevertheless, they still need to cut our teeth. Even if they've been a police officer somewhere else, they still must go through field training. Because just because they're certified, they may have had issues in another place. There's any number of reasons why we want them to come through there. Even something as simple as how to write a report and book somebody into the jail here is not covered in other places, and it's not uniform across the state. So some of those continuing education requirements is beyond the 8.5 months it takes to actually get put out on the street. Then annually, we have to do 24 hours for every member who is a sworn police officer. 12 of those hours must encompass either arrest control, which is fighting or defensive tactics, firearms, and emergency vehicle operations, all areas that are considered high liability, low frequency. Luckily, we don't use them a whole lot, but when we do, there's a high propensity for officer injury as well as subject injury as well as liability. And so that's why those are separated from additional 12 hours that are required by post that's designated by me as the chief based on our local needs. Then we also have legislative mandates that come down and say police officers must now do this in addition. This is only the most recent. This was passed last year. There are 8 hours that are required de-escalation training, verbal de-escalation. We currently do 40 hours. 2 hours is all that's required. 2 hours of proper holds and restraints. So in other words, choke holds and those things that kind of got in the news over the past several years, that's not allowed to be used. Anti-bias training and community policing. Am I beyond my 3 minutes? So these common areas of high liability are when police officers have to use force, when they have to chase people, and then when we have to arrest or seize someone's property. Typically, if we have a lawsuit and we have none pending that I'm aware of or that have been filed against the police department, that's typically where they are filed or what they are filed as a result of. So since taking or joining the police department here and joining the community, our philosophy has always been community policing and problem-oriented policing. What community policing is we engage with members of the community and stakeholders in the community to address what their issues are and find out what's important to them, what's causing them problems, whether it's a parked car on the side of the road or abandoned vehicles. Those disorder crimes can lead to quality of life issues. And so community policing is really trying to find out what is bugging the community and how can we collaboratively address it, either through ordinance or enforcement action or simply changing the environment where it exists. Problem-oriented policing is kind of like our break-ins. Wherever we're having those, we study that, look at the underlying issues, and try and solve it. Now that we have a crime analyst, we are taking more of an intelligence-led focus, which is where we look at what's happening statistically in our community, and that drives what we do in the coming years. So some of those enforcement priorities based on the things I'm talking about is sexual assault and domestic violence. It's unusually high in our community. Crimes against property, which goes hand in hand with illicit narcotics. So those are some issues that are becoming I have told each of our officers, pay attention to these, investigate them to the utmost, and whenever something like this happens, we document every case of it so that way we get an accurate picture of what's actually occurring. And then, of course, in every community, traffic violations is an issue. Traffic safety seems to be the #1 and most visible arm of the police force. It also is the #1 driver of complaints because when people get tickets, they don't like that. Unfortunately, they also don't like getting into traffic crashes where we have had DUI drivers, even recently so, where somebody has lost their life. So it is a necessary evil, even though it's not a popular one, it still is a very important one. Some of our community policing activities, and, you know, this was only supposed to be, I think, 15 minutes, so I'm going to push through this a little bit, but we do a number of different things in the community, and part of that is to have a relationship to where the community feels comfortable coming and talking with us. I participate in all of these, or at the very least am present during one of the functions to be able to have those conversations with the community because it's important for me as well. Now, this last one is something that we are trying to ramp up. It's a site security assessment, both either for a business or a residential building. Crime prevention through environmental design. So if somebody gets their house broken into, if somebody's had a robbery, if someone is just concerned those things may occur, we have a person in the police department who is certified to go out and do a site assessment to say, this is how you can make it more difficult for somebody to break into your house. This is where we place cameras to make it better for us to be able to actively investigate and solve a crime that should happen in your business. So that's something that's a written report free of charge that we provide to the community, and we're trying to let people know about that so it gets taken advantage of more often. This is one of our newer programs here. We just recently purchased uniforms for these young folks. This is our Explorer program. So we have 7 folks there. We actually have 10 in the program. And these are young people that are either juniors or seniors who are earning high school graduation credit by learning about the police force, and hopefully this is our long-term recruitment plan. These are folks who grew up in the community, who are interested in law enforcement, that they get in it, see what it's all about, and they understand walking in eyes wide open on what the Canyon City Police Department can do, and then how to be involved, and the officers already know them. So it's a known quantity. The problem is they're too young. So it's a longer-term hiring plan, but that's one of the things that I've done in the past that has been very successful, both in Florida as well as in Vail, and both of those programs that I was involved with generated successful long-term police officers for the agencies I worked with. So that's our new patrol car. So any questions about the general overview? There's a lot more to it, but I just really don't want to take up the entire time of the council. I know you have some very important pieces, but those are some things that not only relate to the administration of the department, but also why it is so difficult to hire the right people, because I would rather wait and hire the right person rather than hire just a person that doesn't align with our community or departmental philosophy. So any questions about the overview?
I don't have a question, but Chief Harvey, I just want to let you know for my part, if you see any issues that council can help with, feel free to call me. I'm sure other council members feel the same way. Feel free to talk to us, that if there's something that can't be resolved or some way that council can help, let us know, because for my part, I'd sure like to.
Thank you for that.
Any council members over here have any questions?
Because we're going to move into the recruitment piece of it now.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions. You had talked about automatic disqualifiers. I've read that some communities are maybe lifting some of those automatic disqualifiers in order to be able to have more police recruitment, and I was wondering what your opinion is on that.
I think it's dangerous, to be honest with you. Part of the reason why, there are certain jobs that you can't have as a second job being a police officer, because not only is it considered a conflict, it may also being a security guard or bail bondsman or something. There's specific case law that talks about folks who work at adult dancing establishments, that is prohibited. Part of the reason for those increased standards is that the inherent nature of public trust that goes with the police department, and we've seen it all over the country. When trust starts breaking down, altercations occur. Public trust wanes, and the police department becomes the enemy rather than a part of the community that's helping keep it safe. And so there are some very unique things about what we look for in a police officer, that if we start relaxing some of those standards that have been time-tested and proven, it will come back to bite us. And the reason why I'm saying that is that I've seen it happen, quite honestly, and part of the reason why those agencies are relaxing their standards is it is a buyer's market, or I'm sorry, a seller's market, I guess you would say, for police officers right now. Every agency in the nation has staffing shortages, and part of that is because when the community nationally, the national media attacks police officers' credibility, attacks police officers' underpinning philosophy of why they're there, and when you have people in powerful positions that say police are inherently racist, who would want to be part of that? And so when that's the dialogue, when that's the narrative, of course nobody wants to be involved with that, especially the type of people that we are looking for. We don't have that issue here. Our community trusts us. Our community has a relationship with the Canyon City Police Department, so that's not an issue for us. The issue is that we have to constantly recruit to find those right folks rather than relaxing our standards just to get a body.
Thank you. And I have one more question. It's a little off base, but I'd like to have an answer for it. But you had talked about for traffic violations, that's where you're most visible, and that's a consternation for some folks. What would be your reaction? I've heard this from more than once, to folks who say they're glad that the police department is down officers because that means they aren't out giving tickets to everybody on the streets.
So when I first came to Canyon City, every officer was expected to take traffic enforcement action. And what we are trying to do as a department is, clearly numbers and statistics show whether or not we're doing our jobs, quite honestly. But the philosophy that I have in traffic enforcement is it is supposed to change behavior. And so we need to find out where those behavioral problems are resulting in traffic crashes and causing injury to folks or causing problems or safety concerns for folks, and that's where we focus our traffic enforcement efforts. Now, our traffic citations are down, quite honestly, and that's not because people are not committing traffic violations. It's because we don't have enough people to dedicate somebody to doing traffic enforcement. We really need to.
Thank you. Okay, we ready to move on? Okay, let's go to part 2.
Chief, if you'd like to sit down, you could.
I've been sitting all day, council member, but I appreciate that.
Okay.
Keeps my brain moving.
He's young.
All right. So our hiring process when I first came here was somewhat centralized and historically minded, if you will. It was concentrated with the Human Resources Department. There's a number of things that leads to communication lags. There also is a disconnect sometimes with people who are involved with police department recruiting processes. And generally when you have somebody coming wanting to be a police officer, and we have it all the time, they come knock on the front door of the police department. How can I be a police officer? Well, in the past we have said, okay, go to HR and they will tell you an application to fill out and do it that way. That's our process. We are decentralizing that to be more responsive to applicants, because what we're finding out is that, you know, and I heard a strategy that I'm not keen on, but people are less likely to follow traditional means of coming in, filling out an application. There's a process now that even Facebook is being utilized. If you want to apply, there's something to a post that it says apply to this job on Facebook. You hit that button and it sends all of your Facebook information to the agency that's applying. The problem with that in a law enforcement setting is that without a date of birth, without information to figure out what their criminal history is or their employment history, a large number of those applicants potentially could be one of these 43 decertifying misdemeanors or these other disqualifiers. So we can't be completely decentralized, but we are trying to be as responsive as possible to applicants to make it easy for them to apply, rather than making it difficult or a tenuous, lengthy process. When I went to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office in Florida, I had applied at a place called the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which is actually the unincorporated area specifically around Orlando proper. 2,000, roughly 2,200 police officers for that organization, not including the jail or civilians. You include those, it's roughly around 4,000 to 5,000 people in that organization. Humongous. So when I applied for them, it took me roughly 9 months. At the same token, I applied for the agency right next to them, the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, and within a month and a half, they had me hired. Orange County lost me because of their long, lengthy process. That kind of stuck with me. And so some of the processes that I've done up in Vail, I was in charge of the hiring process for Vail for 4 years, and part of that was working with the Human Resources Department to figure out how can we make it easier to get people in here and find the right people. At the IACP conference last year, I'm sorry, 2 years ago now, 2016, there was a guy that was talking about recruiting in police and how the military folks, this guy was a captain, he was a pilot in the Marine Corps, very bright guy, and he applied at a couple of different places in California. And the one that he actually ended up going with, degreed individual, very bright, is the department who responded to him on social media about his questions concerning the department. That's how he made his choice. So if we are so centralized and so historically driven, we're going to miss out on that a Marine Corps captain that's very bright. So we're working with HR to decentralize some of this process, make it easier. I don't think the answer is to lower our standards, because then we get folks that can cause us problems later on, quite honestly, or not be the right fit, and then they're gone in a year or, you know, some other issue. So the process that I think it was included in your general government packet is a process that is one that I helped develop in my other role with the Vail Police Department, and have worked with our HR department to try and develop that here. And essentially the only delays, as it stands right now, is the actual posting and application period and the background. Those are the two most lengthy processes. 30 days for an open application period, 21 days for a background process, but all of our testing, and we actually do more testing now than we did when I first got here. So that 5-step process is an oral board, a police aptitude test, a written essay sample that's graded by a lady that works with us who has a master's degree in English, a personality assessment, which gives us an indication on whether or not they'll pass the psychological, and then a physical agility exercise, which would require them to go over fences, under obstacles, and drag a 150-pound dummy. The physical agility portion is based on job qualifications. In the past, agencies had been sued because they said, okay, for you to be physically fit to be a police officer, you need to do so many push-ups, run so fast, do so many pull-ups, and people started saying, how's this related to my job? The one that we do has been vetted, and it actually relates to specific things they may be required to do actually out in the field. And so it's a much more reliable test of whether or not they'll be functional, and it also gives us a better indication, because there's a cognitive piece to it too, to where when they start the physical agility test, we give them a suspect description, they finish the test roughly 5 minutes later and have to tell us what that description was. So there are some pieces that we are really trying to hone in on people that are going to be successful long-term and address the needs of the organization. And before I go too much further, I also want to say that in addition to community organizations and businesses, the police department works very hard to try and have good relationships with agencies or entities that look out for our employees. So there are two folks sitting in the audience today. I think they wanted to address or at least have some speech or dialogue with you, but they're from the Fraternal Order of Police. That's the police union in Southern Colorado. We have a very good relationship. That's why both of these gentlemen agreed to be here tonight to answer any questions that you might have. But we're looking out for the same thing. We're looking out for the officers. We're looking out for our people, which in turn looks out for the community. So thank you both for being here, Chad and Joe. The streamlined process, roughly as it's outlined in your packet, should take 79 days or less, as long as those deadlines are followed. And the reason why you were given this particular packet is that it simplifies some of the communications pieces, and these are basically the hurdles applicants have to overcome in order to be a police officer. They've got to file an application. They have to go through a phone screen initially, because we'll take roughly 20 applications that look good and narrow those down to 8 that we invite to be actually here and test. Out of those 8, we do 2 alternates in case somebody calls us the night before and says, I'm sick, my job wouldn't let me off, I can't be there. So that way we are functionally using our board's time and everybody that facilitates those tests. And then at the next day is how this is supposed to work, or at least within 24 hours. We have a discussion about how they did at that day's assessment, and then the next day they are given a conditional offer. Now this again is something that's different than other parts of the city, and here's the reason why. Labor regulations require that before somebody takes medical testing, and a medical exam and a drug screen and a psychological exam are all considered medical testing, they must have the promise of a job should they successfully complete those portions. So the conditional offer is nothing more than to say if you complete these processes, it's not an actual offer, it's not something that's binding, and there are conditions associated with it. So it's generally a form letter that comes out within a 24-hour period, and there's additional discussion about some of the particulars of employment later. That's solely so that we can run their background investigation. They give us permission to start that, and then we do the medical testing that we have to have that form for prior to. And we actually have 4 people in that process right now. So since within the last month and a half, after implementing this process that you now have, we have hosted 3 on-site testings. We are hosting another one next week for potential sponsorships to the Pueblo Police Academy that will start in September. And we are continuing to host certified hiring processes. And the reason for that is this. We have 4 people in the process currently. There is no guarantee their background will not reveal something that will take them out of the process. And part of the reason why we do the background last is that the background investigator gets the application, the background packet, the psychological, the oral board's concerns based on the questions that they gave, and all of that is cumulative. So the background investigator says, you know, the oral board has an hour with this person. There's no way they're going to know them in enough detail to say that's a great hire. Now, they'll get better at it, but this process is cumulative. So from the start to the finish, we have a discussion with everybody that's involved with the process to see if, well, the oral board said the person might be rigid or inflexible. When we talk to their boss, that's exactly what they said, is they don't want to do anything other than what they feel is their job. They are inflexible, they were rigid, they were very difficult to deal with. And so if that comes out in the background, the oral board saw that, a personality assessment and a psychological all says, this person is not adaptable, they are inflexible, they have difficulty dealing with confrontation, that's not a person I want. So it is a very comprehensive process, but if we stick to the timelines that you have and the process that we have developed recently, we will definitely alleviate our hiring issues.
Chief Harvey, thank you for your presentation. And so is this the current regimented schedule right now, or is this a proposed?
That is the current.
Okay.
There are some other things that HR is adding to that as far as communications with applicants, but those are not hurdles that the applicant has to overcome. These are the core components that if they don't pass that, they don't move on. So the expanded version, if you will, basically says, okay, when somebody's given a conditional offer, here's how the communication happens. The hiring manager at the police department communicates with HR, who sends out a conditional offer letter, and within 7 days, the background packet has to be returned by that individual. So there's some internal communication that's not listed in here, but the actual hurdles are listed in the packet that you have.
Okay. Now, in the kind of the modernizing and decentralizing to kind of bring our hiring process into the modern job market, do you feel like we've done enough, or do you feel like we need to take any further steps?
So there are definitely some things that we are exploring, social media being one of them, the process I talked to you about a little bit earlier. But those things have to have a discussion about whether or not that is feasible and whether or not it's going to get us the results that we need. I do think that we are having very productive dialogue about how we can decentralize, how we can be more collaborative between the police department hiring manager and the human resources department, so that we can work together on getting these folks here while maintaining the liability aspects of the city, making sure that bona fide occupational qualifications are actually addressed in the hiring process, which would be a source of litigation should there be indiscriminate or inherently discriminate processes. And some of those physical agility tests have been considered inherently discriminate. In other words, a process that no females can pass that is not job-related is inherently discriminatory. So those are the kind of conversations that we're having with HR, but we have decentralized to the point that the hiring manager at the police department basically has the keys to run the process, and that's why we've done 3 processes within the last month and a half. So the short answer to your question is, we have made great strides. I think there are some things that we can still do. Social media is definitely a part of that. We are currently developing a recruiting video with the high school. And actually one of our, I don't know if you know Spencer at the library, but we are looking across the city to find people that have expertises that can help us with things rather than simply looking in one department. You know, and by historical perspectives, I mean, typically HR would develop a pamphlet. HR would do a recruiting video. We are decentralizing that function to say who's best suited to get this done, and we'll do a top quality product. Spencer in the library, his forte was video development. So we are working with him to try and get that video developed so that we can put it out on YouTube, because YouTube is another place that people look. So we are definitely looking in other places. And one of the conversations that I'm having with HR is I have a written plan that we used in Vail to target certain demographics. What I mean by that is not necessarily to exclude people, but we want to increase our applicant pool in certain areas. So if we want college-educated people that are female and minority, then we look for organizations that those individuals flock to. So it's called NALI, National Association for Women Law Enforcement Executives. We have a large number of high-quality applicants that they look, if they are women looking to get into law enforcement, they are going to look at that website. So we have decentralized to the point that we are changing traditional roles to be more responsive to the applicant, and that's the underlying piece that will make us more successful than Colorado Springs or Pueblo. And believe it or not, Pueblo is doing the exact same thing, which is why they have had great success in hiring. So the short answer is we have made progress. There's more to do.
Okay. Well, Chief, I want to thank you for your hard work at trying to bring this into the modern job market. And if there's any further help we can lend you in aiding in this, please don't hesitate to let us know.
Thank you very much, sir.
One comment I want to make is when I first got the letter that you wrote for us, I looked at it, and I started to compare how they did it with the State Patrol that I was involved with for 27 years. A lot of the stuff that you do there is things they do. There's some of the procedures that we do a little bit different than yours, but basically, they're all intertwined with each other with regards to that. The one advantage I would say, well, no, disadvantage for you is the training program, you know, with trying to get people in and stuff like that. Fortunately, you know, with the State Patrol, we have our own academy in Camp George West, and we send them there. The disadvantage to that is they're there for almost forever.
Yeah.
Although they have changed that to allow them to go home on weekends and stuff like that. But it's good to see this. When I first saw it, I says, you know, he's right on line. I appreciate everything that you have done with regards to Kansas City and the police department since you've been here. You know, people can see there's a step up. You know, we'll always have people that are dissatisfied when they get a ticket and stuff like that. But, you know, that's part of, like you said, taking control of traffic. State Patrol does the same thing. If there's an area where we're having high-density accidents, we'll saturate that place to bring it down, and it's successful for that purpose. It's not done just to write a ticket. It's done to make the highways safer, like you're trying to make our streets safer. So I really appreciate it. Very, very good.
Thank you very much, Councilman.
Stu Hamrick,
Oh, wait.
go in line.
This is probably a question for Tony. In looking at the police benefits comparison chart, Tony,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, if you would, please, looking at the holidays, sick leave, and annual leave, personal leave, actually, the sum of all of those, the holiday, sick leave, annual leave, and personal leave, we're kind of on the bottom of the three comparison agencies. And if you would you please look at some way that we might be able to get more into the middle of the other three? And I apologize if I'm taking hours away from you, Chief, but I think that having something a little bit better there might help us.
Actually, we think we are superior, because if you notice here, we're the only organization that practices paid time off. That means we combine sick leave and vacation time, so the individual officer or city employee, because this is citywide, controls all their time. Otherwise, you have to be physically sick to utilize sick leave. Most officers, most employees are not that sick, so they never get to use those hours. In fact, they accumulate hundreds of hours during their career, which they'll never use. So we actually consolidated that with the council's support this past year, and our employees love it because it gives them more control over actual time off. They don't have to fake an illness if they want to take a vacation or take a day off, because you'll notice here, for a new coming officer would have 16 days a year. The other officers would only have 10 or 12 that they can actually utilize. So we actually have greater flexibility and greater use of our time, and we allow the officer or the employee to cash this back. So if they don't use all their time during the year, they can cash it back. So that's another financial reward to them. If they're judicious about their time, we want to encourage them to take time off, but if they don't use it all, they can cash it out, and that's a monetary benefit to them at the end of each year, where generally you can't do that in other agencies.
Than's for that explanation. Thank you.
And I'll piggyback on that. That's the way the State Patrol was, okay?
Yeah.
You had so many days, if you didn't use them, they're gone. You just lost them, and we didn't have the ability to exchange it for anything. You either used them or they're dead.
Meisner?
Dolly's up.
Thank you for this. It was really, really helpful in understanding how all this works. And I just want to comment on one of the ideas that I loved was to have on-duty workout times. It's a part of their criteria for them to be in shape, and time is a big seller over money. That frees up an hour and a half of their day in their off time, and I just want to commend you on allowing that for the officers, because I think that's great.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
that's something we are still working out the bugs on, quite
Okay.
honestly, and that's an idea that we're discussing, but it hasn't been formally implemented yet.
Oh,
And
okay.
staffing, the way it is currently, it wouldn't be possible to do. But that is definitely an idea that I think not only increases the overall health of our folks, but it also increases that job satisfaction. Because at the end of the day, they go work out on duty, it's paid, so they're more likely to do it.
Right.
And all the stress of that shift is pushed away during that workout session. So they're more engaged when they go home.
Yeah.
And we did create a little workout
I
facility
see
next
that.
door here. Now, the officers laugh at it because the weights aren't big enough, but our other employees do utilize it, and that's a benefit to our health plan.
Well, that was
And
my next
stress reduction is
question.
very important.
Do we offer them discounts at local gyms or,
It's up to the gym to offer the discount.
Yeah.
or have we tried? Have we even tried
I
doing
know
some of that?
Vail, specifically Vail had a voucher that instead of working out on duty, they would give a certain amount of money. And, you know, if it's a blank check, we can fix all our ills, I promise you.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're trying to replicate some of those things, but honestly, you know, being fiscally responsible with our money. But no, we don't currently have that. There are some agencies that do it, and they give an allowance for you to go join a gym, but we currently don't do that.
Okay. And then my other question is, are any of the 4 people who are currently going through the hiring process right now local?
Yes, as a matter of fact, 2 of them are graduating the Pueblo Police Academy. They put themselves through the police academy, so that $10,000 they paid. And they are graduating next week. Both of them grew up, went to high school here, and
Great.
one in particular said this is the only place she wanted to work. Some other places tried recruiting her, and this is where she wanted to come.
Good. Okay, good. And then just one more little thing. In this packet, are we passing this packet out?
Yeah, that's public.
Okay. Well, there's a typo, just a tiny
Oh.
little typo.
Sorry about that.
I'll tell you about it later.
Okay.
I just want to make you aware. Okay,
All right,
thank you.
Emmerich.
Well,
Meisner.
The Honorable Mayor, or the Madam Mayor and I are the only people, I think, on council that had the opportunity to participate in your interview. And that was a very exciting time for us in terms of the things that we believed that you were going to bring to this community and what you were going to do. And then for myself, that was relative to how you were going to change the department and how are you going to fix some of the staffing long-term problems. And so that was part of my request in terms of what's going on there and what are we actually achieving. And me hearing the constant concerns from Tony that we're down 2, we're down 4. And I'll make this public statement that I told Tony, we're potentially at a time where we have to recognize that we're never going to fill 4 positions. And if that's the case, we maybe need to look at staffing versus services, take that remaining money that's available and then distribute it to those remaining employees and try to address the problem there. And I realize a portion of the community would not want to accept that, but the reality is we've either got to address the shortage or reduce the services and do something else and keep those people on staff. I'm not in favor of those 12-hour shifts. I realize you've got to do the 10s, but there's that whole process that goes on. Where I'm leading to is I just have or had concerns in terms of what are we doing with recruitment and who's in charge of that and who's going to be responsible for that and who's going to answer for that should it not be successful. And then when it is successful, who's going to reap the rewards. So you kind of indicated that, or I thought I heard you say that you got the keys to the car in terms of this program. And I just want to make sure in my mind and hopefully in council's, who's ultimately responsible for recruitment and the success of hiring in our police department. And in my opinion, that should be with you or the police department and not with HR. I think HR needs to have an involvement. I realize we got some structural issues there, but we need to get that problem solved, and I think you're the person to do that. So I don't know that I need an answer, just wanted to make a statement.
don't think it's a problem. I think the chief has indicated that we've kind of restructured the process. The police department is the principal party involved.
Okay.
HR is a supplementary, complementary element to this. So I think from that standpoint, there's no issues.
Yeah, and I think you always are going to have the HR
Yeah.
element to handle the technicalities of employment. But with the uniqueness of the police departments, I mean, we have to recognize that at any given point in time, we could have an incident like has happened in multiple cities in about 3 seconds. And all of a sudden, things go nasty very, very quickly. And unfortunately, that officer that's on the street is the one that was put in a position of having to make a decision in less than 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Turner, did you have some comments?
I do. Thank you for your presentation. I'm grateful for it, and I appreciated hearing about the new recruitment techniques. I'm hopeful that we'll get some success there. I wonder if there's something you think the department should be doing as far as retaining the folks that we already have, since we really can't afford to lose anyone else.
So, as I mentioned in the memo, what a lot of folks do is that they focus on hiring, getting the body in there, getting a person in there, and then in 5 or 6 years, they say, well, I'm making this amount of money, and if I were in Pueblo, I'd be making this amount of money, or Colorado Springs. And so what many agencies have done across the state who are able to fund something like that is a STEP program. So in other words, based on years of service, functions within the department, certain levels of training, but essentially tying it to a number of years, that if you have an employee who has been there for 40 years, that person is going to be topped out. If you have a person who has been with us, in most departments, the heart of an organization is your 8 to 12-year employees. So generally at that time, between the 3 and 5 year, if we don't do something to retain those individuals, meaning raises or lateral movements or the ability to promote, those 3 to 5 year employees we're going to lose to Colorado Springs and Pueblo, because they will see, I can be on a big SWAT team, I could be a motor officer, I could be, so we're trying to recreate that somewhat here by having these ancillary duties, the marijuana enforcement piece, expanding the canine program, changing the status of our detectives so that it is a rotation, so that people have an opportunity in their career to be able to be a detective, and allow that lateral movement as well as upward mobility. We have some things that we need to fix, quite honestly, in those areas, and a STEP program is one of those that kind of glares out at me. The problem is it costs money to do. And so, I think I might be misquoting Harry, but we generally only look at 80% in the salary ranges, I think, is what we budget for. That would require us to change, that we would, at the police department level, at the very least, look at potentially expecting 100% funding of the allotted positions. Now, we wouldn't use all that. But if you're going to do a STEP program effectively, that's the way you have to budget, because eventually, in a 9 or 8 year or 10-year STEP program, that person's going to be topped out. But the reason why we hang on to them is because they can do all the fun things they can do at big departments, and they know if I stick around, I'm going to be topped out. So there's some things we need to do to make sure that we hang on to folks that are really good.
Yeah, we budget 98% of our departmental strength. We allow for 2% turnover. We average about 4% annually. So we're basically not over budgeting. But I think, Councilmember Meisner has a good point that we need to really look at, is that instead of having 38 sworn officers, are we better served with 35, 34, and using the excess revenue to pump up the STEP program or the base salary of all the officers? And there's pros and cons to that, but I think it's a valid issue that we should look at, because right now we're at a 25% vacancy rate. That's way too high, but, on a typical situation, 5 to 10% we could probably tolerate. That's probably 3 or 4 positions. So if you just don't budget them and, again, reinvest the money in the existing officers, maybe we can do a better job with retention. But I don't want to focus just solely on the economics, because of the 8 officers we either have just lost or about to lose, only one of them probably is directly related to economics. The rest are, and this is the bigger issue that we really haven't underscored, it's the whole millennial generation. They have a different attitude and set of values. Doesn't make them better or worse than their predecessors. They're different. They see not careers, they look at experiences. So when they're a police officer and for whatever reason they decide this is no longer fun, exciting, challenging, they'll completely change course and enter a different field. We just lost 2 outstanding young police officers. They just got married. One's decided to move across the country to his wife's new home, and the other one is getting out of law enforcement. And there's no logical reason for that because they're both outstanding. We have others that are making like decisions because of family situations. You know, husband's overseas as a military contractor. They got 2 kids. They can't afford to be a single mom and a police officer, so they need to be closer to family to support the family unit. Because we're getting more dual income situations where 20, 30 years ago that wasn't the case. So there's a lot more complications in people's decision-making now beyond just economics. But we have to certainly have a good pulse of what their concerns are, whether it's cultural, organizational issues, financial issues, you know, gym memberships. Little things add up, and we have to be very conscientious about every little thing to make sure we're competitive and we're retaining people, because the chief's right. Getting them is one thing, keeping them is even harder.
Well, Tony, that's actually good you brought that up. That was going to be my question to the chief is, have we done a job satisfaction interview with our current force to find out if there's areas of improvement or there's areas of minor cost into the city that we could, you know, improve job satisfaction for better retention?
Yeah, I believe HR actually did a job satisfaction survey last year, and so we definitely look at those issues and what we can affect and change. And I practice management by walking around, if you're familiar with that term, because in a lot of instances, people will tell you things not in a formalized survey that we can change and make better. And so some of these questions are staffing change or schedule change is a great example of that. So we don't have enough people to continue to make 10-hour shifts safe. Now, I will tell you, there are some negatives with reducing the force, and I'll talk about those in just a second, but we're having to change and go to 12 hours. Studies, they're national studies, empirically based, peer-reviewed, that show 12-hour shifts have an effect not only on decision-making, but also on fatigue, lead to officer safety concerns, decision-making at critical moments like we talked about when somebody's life is hanging in the balance. And so 12-hour shifts are difficult for officers, and they're difficult for their families, leading to divorce, leading to all these things. So we devised some schedule to try and a couple different schedules to figure out what's going to be best to minimize that fatigue. And then I went to every briefing and talked with the officers. I didn't ask them, hey, let's vote, who wants to vote on this? But I said, out of these schedules, what impacts is this going to have on you and your family? Because without the support of your family in law enforcement, that's where some of those divorces come into play. That's where a lot of the stresses from home carry over into the job. And so we had those conversations, and what we were leaning towards, we went away from, because the number of issues of child care and turnaround for, you know, off-duty time and fatigue, secondary jobs. We have one that's teaching at Pueblo Community College. All these different things, not, hey, this is the one I like, but this is how this will impact me. And so that's how we developed our schedule. So I do that on a regular basis without a formalized survey. But those things need to continue as well. I think HR should still continue to do those job satisfaction surveys. But one thing I do want to touch on as far as the force reduction that Councilman Meisner talked about, and that's part of the reason why I put this up here. So 16,607 residents. When you look at the Bureau of Justice statistics for police departments in the Midwest and the number of officers per 1,000 residents, it's 2.1. It's also why I put in there that we haven't grown since 2007. Now, our call volume has increased significantly. We were right around 20,000 calls for service per year in 2007, and now we're at 32,000. So if we reduce those number of officers, that's fewer officers really to answer those calls for service, which will lead to burnout. So, obviously, we all have bosses. But I also want to caution you of some potential unintended consequences that may happen from raising a salary but creating a greater workload that might lead to burnout.
Well,
And I recognize that, but I think nationally, everybody's going to have to face the fact that the amount of services that we want from limited police departments has to change. And I don't know where that's at, but that's where creative people like you become very valuable in terms of looking at that whole scenario and coming up with an alternative or a plan that hasn't been tried. And that's what I'm looking at is, I think over the next couple of years, you're going to be forced to deal with that situation, that you're going to have to go against the national trend and try to solve a problem.
Well,
Because people want to get in the,
Councilman Meisner, that's true, but we can't minimize the service of responding to 911 calls.
yes, you can. Ask the city of Pueblo.
Yeah, you can triage calls.
You
Yeah, there-
absolutely can.
There's a different
You have a
qualitative.
15-minute or a 3-hour
Yeah.
call wait
Yeah.
versus a 15, or,
Yeah.
a 5-minute.
I mean,
City
the
of
fire
Pueblo's
does it
been
with
dealing with it
EMS
for-
services in big cities. They have to triage calls. I mean, there are more important calls than others, and they have to triage them. And because the Councilman's right, we're going to have to prioritize our resources. This issue is not going to get easier in the future because, again, the generational change in values, their outlook towards law enforcement has changed compared to past generations. I don't see it changing back to the old way. And we're just going to have to deal with the fact that this is going to be a difficult field to recruit and retain from, and the pool of candidates is constantly shrinking. And the chief's right. Every department in the country is facing the same problem. Right now, the easiest course is steal from your neighbor, but we can't get in an arms race in that respect. So we have to re-examine just the whole nature of the service in the long run.
And in the city of Pueblo's situation, and maybe some other gentleman could help, just briefly, they essentially did that, which directly related to I think the sales tax that passed, or the tax that passed, that resulted in them being able to add, I think, 24 positions that they're trying to fill, that they can't fill now. And that's why they're going through this massive hiring thing, is because people said, we want law enforcement and we're going to pay for it. Because we're not going to wait 3 hours for somebody to come over for a particular call.
Okay.
Well, the thing about it is, too, when we talk about political and things they've done, ultimately, the decisions that were made, and this is what we have to look at here, the decisions that were made were by the chief of police, okay? The person that they hired to do it. He was the one who made those decisions. So any kind of decisions we're talking about with regards to our police department should solely rest on the chief, okay? Because ultimately, he's the main guy. And if he thinks something can be better by doing that, I support him. And if he thinks something we need to keep, I support him. But ultimately, he's the man who's responsible for the safety of this town. We're here to help support him financially if we can, and any other way. But that's the main person.
And
Okay, we
that
have-
individual should be responsible for hiring his staff.
So we have someone from the audience who has a request to speak to council. I'd like to recommend, if anybody else in the audience has a desire to speak to council on this subject, that we ask you to fill out a form over here on the table and turn it in and bring it up to the clerk. But if that's okay, we'll take a little pause and call Joseph Santoro up to the stand, please.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
thank you, Chief.
I thank you for calling me up to speak to you concerning this. My name is Sergeant Major Joseph A. Santoro, United States Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal, retired. I'm a trustee of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 34 here in Canyon City, because I believe that the police are the thin blue line between us and the criminals that exist out there. The chief covered a lot of things that I wanted to talk about, but what I did want to speak to you about was a few national statistics that I researched. They show that almost all law enforcement organizations in America are very understaffed. They have probably a staffing of approximately 65% of the needed officers, and I've heard that repeated here today. The understaffing does lead to the officers working 60 to 70 hours weekly, and with that, in many of the agencies are being getting comp time rather than a pay. And when that occurs, then that creates a problem where they are in a catch-22. They may not get the comp time because they can't let the officer go because they are understaffed. Pay in some instances is just above the poverty limit, and officers may or may not receive health or retirement or death benefits. That's really hard to keep an officer without those benefits. Family time for officers is terrible because of the time that they put in, and approximately 3 out of 4 officers end up divorced if they are career officers. Sometimes they are in an adversarial situation with their leadership of their agency, and sometimes that adversarial relationship extends out to their communities and the leadership of those communities. Now, these are national statistics. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone or anything. But what I'd like you to realize is law enforcement officers enter a war zone every day. I did 33 years in the Army. I didn't enter it every day. They do. I've heard many of them say to me, I wonder if I'm coming home tonight to see my wife and kids. That's a terrible thing to hear from anybody. They're forced to make life and death decisions in approximately 1.5 to 2 seconds. I didn't have to worry about that in the military, but they have to worry about it when they become involved in shooting instances. What this results for the officers are PTSD problems for them and for their families after the shooting, and even for their agencies that they work for. So what I think is happening possibly is that you have a revolving door situation where officers are moving on, part of it being the millennials and selfies that are doing that, but also when these people move on, then unfortunately the chief of police has to hire new people, and that process takes time and a lot of training. So my opinion is your community deserves the best officers that can be found and can be trained, and that your department and the chief are doing the very best that they can to do that for you. So what I think as a final comment from me to you is that the department and its officers deserve the full support and understanding of the community and the folks that run that community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Harvey, do you have any final comments? And I would like to, in those comments, I do have a question. Can you quantify the cost to our police department when we do have high turnover rates, as far as the cost of recruitment, hiring, training?
So I don't have a number for you. I can estimate it roughly because the officer salary going through training both in the academy and then the field training officer, I can come up with some numbers, but I don't want to guess. But it's fairly high.
So every time we lose an officer, there's a definite cost to that as well.
There is.
Before we let you go, I did have a question. It sounds like the call numbers have just about doubled in the past 10 years. I don't think our population has changed that greatly in that time. Do you know why those call numbers have changed so drastically?
No, I don't. I was actually told, and I was trying to find the population statistics, but do we have 2010 census data?
It's pretty much the same.
Is it the same?
Yeah, we really
It's
have
very
not
hard.
grown that
Yeah,
much.
Yeah.
I don't know why
If
it's
it's more than
changed.
1 or 2%, that'd be on the high side.
Right.
Part of that philosophy is our society's expectation of more
Well,
service.
I wondered that. Yeah, that's why I asked the
So,
question.
It's something goes off, and
Yeah,
we take
call the
care,
police.
you know, we take care of it by calling the police department.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I would like to say, Chief, as a small business owner, you know, I read a lot of the industry magazines about, you know, it's every business, every industry, it's getting more expensive to maintain staff. It's getting more competitive to try and maintain staff for a longer amount of time. But what a lot of the statistics I've read are pointing at is that money only lasts so long in job satisfaction. And it really goes for longevity on the foundation of the organizational values and the leadership of that organization. And I'd actually like to commend you, because if I wanted to be an officer, you're a guy I'd work for. So I would like to say that I think that with your leadership, you're going to have a higher retention rate, and I think you're going to have better success. You know, I'd like to throw numbers all day long and think it would cure the woes of our officer deficiency, but I think it's going to be on the foundation and on the backbone of our organizational values and our leadership.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, one of the things, ever since I became a supervisor, that I learned from my mentor was that people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And so every time I lose somebody, that's what I ask not only myself, but my staff. Why did this person leave? And most of the ones that I obviously sent that to you, just about all of them, it's a family situation, something I have no control over. But if it is within my control, I try and find that information out. If it's a supervisory practice, I try and mitigate it, because I start with that prospect first. People don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And so when somebody leaves, I ask myself, okay, was my relationship good enough that I know why this person's truly leaving? So with that mindset, regardless of whether that's the case or not, that's how I try and lead.
Well, and the efforts to interact with your men on a more facetiously coffee and a donut basis, as opposed to asking them to write it down on paper, I think will get you a lot better success with your men. And I think, you know, that's the better direction to go. I think obviously HR obviously will always need paper. They're always going to need surveys filled out, but people and employees will tend to open up much more on when they can look in the eye and on a face-to-face basis than they ever will on paper and pen.
Like, we do the annual survey every year. 2 years ago, when we first initiated it, health care was the #1 issue, not just with the officers, but citywide. The council responded. We invested over $350,000, lowered their monthly premiums, lowered their deductibles, improved the overall plan. The satisfaction level for the health plan went through the roof last year after the first year. This next year, the #1 issue with our police officers, but the staff as a whole, is salaries. And the council again stepped up. We adjusted salaries for almost half our employees to get them at least to the minimum step of our competitive agencies in Southern Colorado. So we're still at the floor, not the ceiling. We need to routinely increase that so we remain competitive. And then there's these other factors, but we at the minimum have to keep that basket full of economic benefits competitive with the industry that we're competing against. Largely, we're looking at Southern Colorado.
Okay, so
I want
knowing
to
that.
make one final comment. With law enforcement, I don't care whether it's the sheriff's department, police department, Colorado State Patrol, any of these other things, your heart and your soul has to be in it, okay? And I'll pat myself on the back. We went through a crisis here in Kansas City where I was the only one for a whole week to cover Fremont, Tyler, Custer County. I was the only one, okay? So you have to love the job you're doing. And like I say, it makes no difference whether it's a sheriff's department, a police department, state patrol, all this other stuff. That's a job that somebody says, I love the job because of the satisfaction that I get out of serving the public and protecting them. Thank you.
I want to close and make sure that Chief Harvey understands that however I said things, I hope you understand the level of support that I have for you and the level of success that I hope that you achieve. Just keep that pool of applicants going and solve our problems. And
I
keep me
just-
safe on the next ride-along.
I just want to say thank you, because that's what I've heard overwhelmingly, in both with Tony and with council. Support for the police department is overwhelmingly the message, and support for me and the job that I'm doing, too. So I really appreciate that, and I will definitely try and have more energy juice and protein ring conversations with people, because we don't call them donuts anymore. But thank you very much for the time and the ability to come present tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate it. We know that public safety is number one concern for our constituents, and it's important to us, too. So thanks for all that you do. Okay, do we have folks here for the energy? Okay, so come on up. If you want to take a seat, you're more than welcome to. It's wherever you're most comfortable.
Thanks, everybody, for taking the time. I'm going to start out and just introduce myself. My name is Raphael Schiffman, and I'm here with Clean Energy Collective, and we are a developer of community solar gardens. And I also want to thank you for the excuse to come down here today at this meeting, because it allowed me to ride the Oil Well Flats Trail system this afternoon, which was spectacular. So thank you for that as well, because I know that was a city effort. So I guess. Okay. So just as an introduction to what community solar gardens are, roofless solar or community solar is an opportunity, is a optimally located offsite solar facility. And we work with Black Hills Energy. They've actually awarded us a 2 megawatt array, and 2 megawatts may or may not mean anything to you guys, so I will go into a little more detail in a moment about what I'm talking about when I say a 2 megawatt award. So Clean Energy Collective and Black Hills Energy have entered into a power production agreement, also known as a PPA, to provide electricity under the Community Solar Garden program that Black Hills manages as a requirement by the Public Utility Commission. And we are proposing construction of a community solar garden in Canaan City at a site which we intend to lease from the Smith family, who's some of which is here today. And I'll go into a little more detail about what our agreement would be with them as we move forward. So this is, I appreciate you guys taking some time out of the agenda to let us speak. This is sort of our introduction to the city formally to introduce this idea to you. And a little bit about CEC. We basically pioneered the community solar model. We've been around for 9 years. We have about 80 employees. We're based in Louisville, so we're a Colorado-based company, but we are active in 16 states. We've worked with 33 different utilities. We have, over 64 community solar gardens around the country that are in operation. And so we sort of pioneered the concept, and then as utilities and states are adopting community solar legislation and programs, we're there to fill that need. And so the formal name of this project, as we have it now, is BHE Fremont 1. And we proposed the Smiths family site as a response to Black Hills Energy's RFP for a community solar garden. We've entered there's a lease option agreement between CEC and the Smith family, and that is an option that, should we exercise that option, we'd be leasing approximately 14 acres of their property for a period of 20 years with certain options to extend, should the program be extended. And then we've also signed with Black Hills Energy, we've signed a power purchase agreement. And that power purchase agreement is to provide energy to the grid. So we're essentially a subcontractor of Black Hills Energy for a period of 20 years, supplying energy to their grid from the community solar garden, as well as managing the program, allocating the power to the different customers participating in the program. And anybody who is in Cannon City, in Fremont County, or an adjacent county to Fremont County can participate in the programs as long as they're a Black Hills Energy customer. So, the city could participate, schools, any municipal organization, and as well as individual homeowners and businesses. So I'll stop there just for a second to see if there's any questions just on the broader about CEC or community solar gardens, and then I'll get into a little more details about this specific project.
I have a question. When you say that anyone in Fremont County can participate, is there a buy-in fee for the participant, or
So
is there?
the specific product hasn't been designed yet because we're very early stage. But when I say participate, it is what's called a pay-as-you-go model, which essentially the electricity that we're producing is less expensive than the energy that you would normally purchase from Black Hills Energy. So when you sign up for the program, you're essentially agreeing to purchase your electricity through the program rather than directly from Black Hills Energy. And it shows up on your bill as an on-bill credit. We work with the utilities billing system. And so to answer your question, it's generally a 10 to 25% savings on their electricity bill. But that's what anyone within Fremont County or adjacent would be able to do.
And there's no special equipment that a home would need to purchase in order to?
No, and so all the equipment involved in the program is our solar facility and the utility's existing billing system, and our system talks to the billing system.
Okay.
So the homeowner or business owner has their bill and they see a separate line item for their community solar garden credit.
Okay, thank you.
Can community solar gardens be on rooftops, or does it have to be on acreage?
They can be on rooftops if there is a large enough commercial roof space. It has been proposed, we've proposed it in several RFPs. And I am aware of some smaller community solar rooftop arrays, but to answer your question, yes, they can be on a rooftop.
What's considered the appropriate size or the minimum size?
It would depend more on the RFP being put out. If most of the RFPs in Colorado are for either 500 kilowatts or 2 megawatts, a 500 kilowatt array is reasonable for a large warehouse roof with the right configuration characteristics. A 2 megawatt array, typically on a ground mounted system, would take up about 10 to 14 acres. And so you wouldn't really be doing that on a rooftop. Another reason why we prefer the ground-mounted array, and I'll get into this when I talk about our system that we're proposing, but when it's ground-mounted, you can put it on a tracker racking, and what that'll do is it'll follow the sun throughout the day, and it'll produce a lot more energy than it would if it was at a fixed orientation on a rooftop, because there is not currently the technology for rooftop trackers.
Okay, thank you. Meisner has a question.
You made a statement that the product's not developed yet. In answer to Dolly's question? Are you talking about the physical product or what is that? Expand upon that.
So the product being the, and this is a little out of my ballpark. So I'm going to double check to make sure I'm not misspeaking, and if I am, I'll correct that. But the product being what we would be offering the homeowner, like through our website. Like if you called up Clean Energy Collective today and said, I want to participate in the BHE1 Fremont program, we would say, it's not available yet. what that product would be would essentially stipulate the amount of savings that participation in the program
Okay.
would be possible. And part of that is being that we're such early stage development. I mean, we haven't contracted civil engineers or construction companies or put any equipment on order. So the complete economic model has some blanks to fill in before we'd be able to say, you know, you would save 15% versus 16%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I also have a couple questions. So folks who could participate in this, would it be residential only, or would it also include commercial business?
Commercial as well.
Okay. How many households or businesses do you think would be accommodated by this project?
So it's a good question. So with 2 megawatts, everybody's energy usage is different, but if you had to say an average capacity that would provide the average amount of power, which you could say 800 kilowatt hours a month is, if you had to pick an average, and the reason I say that it's variable is you can have a very large house using very little energy, and you can have a very small house using a ton of energy. So it's really hard to pin that down. But if you had to and you said 800 kilowatt hours a month is what the average person uses, this would be somewhere in the ballpark of 400 of those homes or businesses.
And then do you know, does the utility still collect franchise fee for that energy that's purchased through the garden?
I do not know the answer to that question specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe so, but I'm not sure if there's a franchise fee stipulated in our power purchase agreement. I don't believe that there is, but I can get that answer for you.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay?
Okay, all right, let's move on. So this is our preliminary design for the community solar garden. And just to orient everyone to where we are, this would be South Street right here. And this would be, is it Cone? And this would be Cone right here. So we've got I believe this is Mountain View Park. And South Street. So just to give you guys an idea of where we're talking about in town. And this would be our array. The yellow line is just a rough outline of the Smiths property. The red line is the fence that we would put up around the array. And the blue strips are the solar panels mounted on single axis trackers. So as I mentioned, it's just under a 2 megawatt AC site, approximately 14 acres. Quantities of the solar panels, some of the technical things, that's on a single axis tracker. We use an also energy data acquisition system, and this is getting in a little of the O&M details, but we monitor the systems 24/7, so we know what's going on with them, and we have cameras on site, so we know that everything's okay on site. And going back to your question, it's about 400 homes is what a 2 megawatt array. So this is conceptual. This is what we presented to the utility during the RFP process. And they had a point system for selecting which location they would want to award the project. And this was the project that had the greatest level amount of points and that we were awarded.
Does that have to be approved by the PUC?
The program is approved by the PUC, and the program, essentially Black Hills is following the PUC's regulations for managing the program.
I have a question. Does this potential project, does that meet current zoning requirements for that area?
It does not, and that would be sort of continuing on my side, sort of what our plan is that we're proposing.
Okay.
Currently, it's medium residential, and our intention would be to rezone where we would put the array to parks and open space, and under parks and open space, public utilities is a conditional use based on our research.
You had mentioned that these are on a kind of a pivoting axis that follows the sun. Is there any impact, being that it butts up to a park and residential, to residents as far as either reflection from the array or anything like that?
So because the panels are actually oriented north-south, you don't get direct glare off of them, but you will at certain times of day, at certain times of year, there can be a glare. What's nice though about it being on a tracker is that it moves about every 15 minutes. So if there were a glare, it's going to be for a period of time, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, depending on all the trigonometry. But the panels that we use have an anti-reflective coating on them to try to reduce the glare. And because we are using single-axis trackers, that reduces the glare quite a bit compared to it being a fixed array where you could have the same glare at the same time of day seasonally, going right into your window. So I should mention that we typically install our community solar gardens adjacent to residential areas and do not get unhappy neighbors with glare or
Negative
anything else like
impact
that.
or
Yeah,
complaints?
no. And
Okay.
we do a glare analysis as just part of our diligence, and also depending on other partners in the project for financing, they like to see the glare analysis. So we do a glare analysis that will tell us exactly when, where there could be a glare. And, if we were to know that that's, the front window of a business or organization, then, typically we can address that pretty easily by just changing a few things around.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question. This might be for Dr. Bellantoni. Is this project entirely within the city?
It is.
Thank you.
And this is a picture of our array that we have up in Lake County. And just to give you a sense of what a single axis tracker looks like. So this is a picture taken from the north side of the array facing south. And so that's what it looks like. And this is this is also our Lake County array. And this is just an example of our on-site cameras that we have. This was a shot taken from a couple months ago.
And your axis would be north-south, is that right?
The axis of rotation of the panels would be from east to west, but if we just go back,
So your axis is pointing north and south?
yes, the rows. It's a little hard to see, but yeah, the rows of panels are coming from north to south. And then they would face the east, and they'd face this direction in the morning and slowly rotate throughout the day, and then they'd be facing west by the end of the day.
Thank you.
So land use permitting, we've had initial conversations with Patrick Mulready and Adam Lancaster, who are in general, cautiously optimistic about the location that we've cited for the array being a good one. They've given us a little bit of initial support in terms of ordinances and what a path to permitting would look like. And that was, the first phone call was to talk to Patrick about it. And then I was here about a month ago and sat down with Patrick and Adam Lancaster just to, again, say this is an idea we have and something that we're going to propose and get their input before having this formal introduction. And I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, but Adam Lancaster did say that this would be a perfect use for that piece of land due to some of the soils that are there and the fact that it's a little bit of a higher water table. He said it's never going to be developed for much else. So I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, but we did get that support from him at initial meetings. We've partnered with Angela at Environmental Alternatives, Inc. to represent us during the land use approval process, just based on her experience and local expertise. We felt like it is a community solar garden, and so we like to work with the community and make sure that everybody's happy. So as a public utility, or more technically accurate, a subcontractor of a public utility, our intention would be to subdivide the Smiths property and rezone to parks and open space. And according to zoning code, 17.12.160B. This is a conditional use for public utilities, government essential. And so, let's see. So that's essentially the introduction. I hope I kept it to about 10 minutes, but that's our introduction and what we'd like to propose. So I'm interested if you guys have further questions or feedback.
I'm going to excuse myself. I'd like dinner guests coming at 6:30. I'll rely on you know.
All right,
Thanks,
I
Frank.
hope you have a nice
Thanks, Frank.
dinner. Dolly, did you have?
Yes. So, okay, this project right here will accommodate about 400 homes or businesses. What would it take to increase that?
We would love to do that. Unfortunately, that's the cap from the program.
Okay.
So it's PUC. So we couldn't do anything to increase it other than up until about 2022, there will be a subsequent standard offer and RFPs from Black Hills Energy. So next year, there will be another RFP from them, and if we were awarded another site in Canyon City, we would, that's really the only way to, we can't go above 2 megawatts. We can just do more additional gardens over time as the utility releases RFPs from them. And I should mention, this will be our 4th array that we've done with the utility. So we have a track record of keeping everybody happy. We have, our first array was in Pueblo County, our second array is in Crowley County, and our third one's in Otero.
And how far into these contracts are you?
So the oldest one is Pueblo, and I believe that would be 3, maybe even 4 years. And the Otero and Crowley County arrays were built this year.
Okay.
Earlier
and
this year.
in the Pueblo array, did you have to work out any glitches? And if so, what were those?
So I can't answer that question only because I wasn't the project manager for those projects. And there's always small glitches and things that need to be ironed out. I mean, typically, some of the challenges arise just out of the fact that, just a guess here, but is this the first time anyone's proposed a community solar garden?
To my knowledge.
Yeah.
So
There's been a
usu-
lot of talk.
Yeah, I mean, so
You know, there's a lot of potential. Yeah.
So it's usually, that's the if you could say a glitch is just the fact that it's not a familiar process.
Sure.
And it's, sometimes it's a little bit of a different animal, but, you know, like I said, we like to think of ourselves as a subcontractor of the utility. And so that sometimes helps put it into the right compartment, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just go down the row.
I know sometimes the PUC can have arcane and Byzantine rules, but I believe, and correct me if you know something different than this, but I believe that a municipal utility is not limited to 2 megawatts, since they would be purchasing and constructing essentially.
That's absolutely correct. All of this just falls under the community solar legislation. So the gardens are capped at 2 megawatts. We would love to, so just as an example, I'm currently also working on projects in South Carolina, and there's a 10 megawatt, a 6 megawatt, and a 2 megawatt as part of that portfolio all going in at the same time. So different PUCs look at it differently.
What sort of community objection have you heard relative to the utilization of this property for this project?
Sure. So glare is one. We'll get
Specifically with this project,
sorry.
location.
None, and that's not to say none will arise. Right, but basically everyone who's in this room are the only people in town that know about this project, not including Patrick and Adam Lancaster. So that's not to say the objections won't come.
TV said a lot more than that now.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's more people than you're aware of.
I forgot that this was on TV. I apologize.
That's okay.
So, well, based on that, though, and your past experience, what are the top complaints?
So on past experience, people will have concerns about glare, and we can address that with a glare analysis and can give them a third-party engineered study that says when and where glare will appear. The other is noise, and there is a low hum from the inverters, which are what are converting the DC produced by the solar panels into AC electricity and connecting to the grid. I don't foresee that being an issue, and we can document it not being an issue in this case due to the distance of where our equipment will be located to the nearest homes. The loudest piece of equipment that could potentially be used, because we haven't made final equipment selection decisions because it's early stage, but if we were to use the loudest inverter that there is out there, the spec sheet for that inverter is 30 decibels at 50 feet. And we're going to be, somewhere in the range of 500 feet away from people. So, so noise does come up. I don't necessarily see that as an issue. And then the third one would be visual impact. Some people, and we've had people say, like, we don't care what you do, we just don't want this in our backyard, and that's certainly understandable. But visual impact is another one. And so, we typically use a game fence for it. If you look, and that's, no, I'm trying, there's a picture in the presentation with, so you can barely see in this image that there is a game fence around the array. That looks a lot better than a chain link fence with barbed wire and things like that, but visual impact is sometimes a concern.
Okay. And Turner, you had a question?
I did. So the panels are collecting the energy. How is the energy stored? Is it in Black Hills grid then?
Yeah, so no energy is actually stored on site. All of the energy is fed directly into Black Hills grid and metered. Oh, excuse me. There is actually and part of the reason why we propose this site is there is an overhead medium voltage 3-phase transmission line going in between the two arrays.
Real convenient.
So is Black Hills already set up to accept this energy, or would they need improvements to their system?
So they would do, we pay for an interconnection. So they don't need to make improvements in the sense of increasing the size of the wires along all the lines. They do need to put some metering and some safety equipment on the pole that we'll be connecting to. And as part of our agreement with them, we would be paying for them to make those improvements so that we could plug in, for the simplest terms, so we could plug in
So they
there.
wouldn't be going to PUC to ask for a rate increase to accommodate that?
No,
Okay.
no,
Theoretically.
no.
Well, I mean, I can picture that being a concern.
I have a question on some of the physics of the arrays. Can you go back to that picture that actually shows the array right there? How far off the ground would you guess that is?
So it's rotating. So usually when it's at its maximum tilt, which would be about 45 to 50 degrees. Typically, we look at snow loads to determine what that height should be, and we try to get it at a height in which you will, because snow is going to fall off the panels, but it's also going to pile up. So we try to get it so that you're not going to have the panels as they're rotating knocking into a pile of snow. So I know that's not answering your question, but there's some other considerations that go into it. Typically, on the low edge, you'd be 2 to 4 feet above the surface of the ground, and on the back end, as far as the maximum height, somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 7 feet.
And the reason I ask is, if I understand your map correctly, it butts pretty close up to that park up in North Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And I just asked from the standpoint of curiosity with children, like, is there anything that they can, if they get on the premises, is there any danger of injury with either touching the panels, messing with the panels?
Sure. So this would be considered a, it's an electric system. There should not be anybody, and there are inherent risks to being around the equipment. All of it is installed in a code compliant manner, but part of that code is to have it fenced to prevent access. But certainly it would pose similar risks to anyone unqualified to be touching.
Well, the reason I ask is
Yeah.
because you had mentioned a game fence, and then, we're butting right up to a park there, and kids are curious, and,
Yep.
I just want to make sure that it
It's
doesn't
mo-
pose any kind
It's
of.
mostly an older kid park. Probably a bigger concern would be soccer balls going in, but it's just pretty far away. It's not that close.
Just melt them.
Not that kind of stuff.
That said, addressing your concern, I mean, part of code is having, caution signs around it. So again, I understand kids are curious, valid concern, but we do. So if you were to just go up to your average system that's operating and touch it, it's not an immediate high volt. It's not like going into a transmission substation where anything you touch is live. Everything is, there are no live exposed parts. So you could walk up to that array and touch it and be okay. Now, if you started unplugging things and licking them, now you're gonna have more
Basically, just the
problems.
general touch would be my concern is,
Yes.
There's no risk.
So I want to be clear. Nobody should ever walk up to electrical infrastructure and touch it. That being said, you can walk out there. If you were to touch it, there is not an immediate shock hazard.
And you say you do have security cameras.
So and just to be clear, we do have cameras on site, but I wouldn't qualify them as security cameras, just to be totally clear, in that we are not monitoring the sites necessarily for security. We're monitoring to see if there's snow on the panels, if, this would not be the case on this particular project, but we have other projects with fast-growing grasses, and so we need to know, do we need to get out there and trim the vegetation back and things like that. So it's not a security camera, but there is a camera on site.
Okay. Meisner?
This is probably more for Black Hills, but I know that there was some controversy in Pueblo, and I'm going to at least relate it to Pueblo, where initially the people that had solar energy that were plugging into the system were getting a credit, and then that credit wound up being reversed to an additional charge, if I'm understanding that whole process correctly. Would,
I can take your question back. That I'm not familiar with.
What you might be thinking of is the proposed increase for the grid charge for folks who have solar. At one point,
That sounds like what you're talking about is if you have electricity, it's the argument that the utility would make is because you're paying less to us for electricity, that's unfair to other ratepayers because the infrastructure costs remain the same, so therefore we're going to charge solar companies to remove that imbalance. That could be what you're referring to.
I think that is what Mr. Crocker
And-
said when he spoke to us a
Right.
month and a half ago.
And if so, that is not the case with community solar gardens.
what's the difference?
The difference being that we are going through, rather than it being mounted on each person's individual roof, they don't have, in a residential solar system, there's no PPA with the utility, and there's no renewable energy portfolio standard with that homeowner. That homeowner has just elected to put panels on their roof and are paying somebody else for that energy, whereas in our case, the utility is purchasing the energy from us at a rate that they're happy with, and we are able to sell that energy to someone else at that reduced rate. So I think the simple difference is that the utility has a requirement to support the renewable energy, their renewable energy portfolio. They're doing that by installing community solar gardens, as opposed to with residential, there's no cap, there's no limit. And so they're imposing those fees as a way to take some control over something that they have no control over, which is every single person on their grid could put solar on their roof, and their revenue would decrease dramatically enough that they wouldn't be able to maintain their infrastructure.
My
is this
concern
under
is
control?
fundamentally, that's the same thing. I mean, investing in your community garden. And I'm understanding that if I invest in that garden, I then in turn will have a reduction in my utility cost. And fundamentally, my concern would be that in 5 years, the PUC and Black Hills decides that there is no difference between the guy that's got a solar panel on his roof that reduces his electrical bill and me investing in a solar field that reduces my electrical bill. Fundamentally, I don't know that those two are any different.
I think it's that there is a renewable energy portfolio standard that the PUC has imposed on the utilities to meet, and this is like their effort to meet that.
So it's
But-
not individuals investing in the solar garden, it's the Black Hills Company itself is investing in the solar garden. Is that correct?
No.
It's that they are required to meet a certain percentage of their customers to have renewable energy and to have a carve out of that for community solar gardens. So this is a requirement of the utility to offer this RFP every year and to offer I don't know what the total megawatts that they're supposed to have interconnected, but it's sort of like they're fulfilling their order from the PUC, essentially.
So are you saying that home solar systems do not count towards that quota that they're supposed to meet?
That I'm not sure. I just know that a home solar system, any company could say, pay us to put this system on your roof, and that the utility has no control over how many people are going to take advantage of that, versus a cap of 2 megawatts for a community solar garden in which the utility has a PPA for and are involved in the process, whereas your typical residential utility has no say.
Mark, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I do. So under the renewable energy standard, I'm not an expert on that. I can always get our renewable energy person to come in and speak with you to give you a better overview of the program. We're required by the PUC to reach a certain level by 2020. I believe it's 30% of our energy has to be produced by a renewable resource. A certain portion of that has to be behind the meter. So the PUC has allocated an actual amount of energy, and those are the programs that go towards the renewable energy standard. And those are the programs that we have rebates and certain credits. Anybody can participate in putting in renewable energy into their home, but under the PUC mandate, they've allocated a certain amount that is required of Black Hills Energy.
And what's that percentage that you have to have by 2020 of renewable energy?
30%.
So by 2020, I believe the overall impact is that 30% of Black Hills Energy has to be produced by renewable energy.
Okay, and from what I understand, to get a community garden, an RFP has to be put up by Black Hills. And so this project is based on an RFP that was put out?
Correct.
Are there any future RFPs that could potentially be coming into the Canyon City area?
I can't answer that at this time, but I can find out for you.
Okay, other questions?
I had one. So when we're talking about this project, it's exclusive to Black Hills Energy, right?
Correct.
So no other energy company could come in and you couldn't contract through another energy company?
That's correct. This is a power purchase agreement for Black Hills Energy to
Okay.
buy the energy from Clean Energy Collective. To answer your question, I do know that for several years into the future, they will be doing a 500 kilowatt offer and a 2 megawatt offer. That's what they've done for the previous few years, and they'll continue to do so.
Like for Fremont County itself, or just over the?
For the entire Black Hills
entire Black Hills
territory. Yep.
So is it competitive?
It is. Well, I should ask, competitive in terms of like multiple people bidding for that, or competitive in terms of communities wanting?
Communities wanting?
I would say it's not competitive in terms of communities wanting, because the communities typically are, it's a situation like this of post-award, is when the communities are involved, only because we submitted in several different counties and locations and sites, not knowing which would be awarded, and we just don't have the resources to have these conversations for every RFP response that we're going to do.
And is there a benefit to a community, like, is there going to be an added benefit to Canyon City itself to have a community garden within our jurisdiction?
Being able to participate in the program and being able to tout that you have, you know, a community solar garden located in your city.
I still have a question about it's not clear in my mind how I'm going to invest in that.
So you're not investing, you're participating in a program in which, signing up for the program, you're agreeing to have energy from the array allocated to your
That's
utility
investing.
billing.
Okay. I understand it now.
Okay, Turner?
So who can purchase from the array that would be in our community? Would it only be Fremont County Black Hills customers, or only people in the city, or?
It would be anybody in Fremont County who's a Black Hills customer and anybody in an adjacent county who's a Black Hills customer.
So we could potentially have folks who don't live in Fremont County who use this energy. There wouldn't be any limit on, what I'm trying to get at is there a potential that we could have the array here, but folks in the community wouldn't have access to the energy from it?
If nobody in the community signed up to participate in the program, then that would be the case.
What if you have more people than you can accommodate?
That's actually very common.
I'm sure it is.
All of our arrays have a waiting list,
Uh-huh.
and essentially it's waiting for another RFP and Solar Garden to come online.
So would folks in the city have priority then?
With that being said, let's say we had if the Solar Gardens next year went in a county that touches Fremont County, people interested could still participate in that arrays program. So is there a way to prioritize for the city? That I can take that back to my team and see, but I don't know if there's a
Or
way
even-
to
even in
reserve
the
capacity.
county. Even in the county.
Well, right, because I mean, if we're going to have the burden of the array, I'd like to also have the benefit of it.
Right.
You know, I think that would be the hope.
From a selfish standpoint,
Yeah, it's like
could
a-
the city negotiate in their upcoming franchise agreement that the city itself, as a consumer of significant amounts of electricity, would have priority? Because we spend over $500,000 a year on energy.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, 10 to 25% reductions. That's a lot of savings for our taxpayers.
So I can't answer that question, but I can certainly get an answer
Yeah.
back to you
It's
guys.
likely PUC governed. I mean, this is a PUC program, the mandate coming down to Black Hills. And because of that, they probably don't play preferences among communities.
It'd be interesting to find the answer to that.
One quick question.
Quick question,
So
Meisner?
let's say I invested today. Can I stop in 5 years? Or is it a lifetime commitment? You know what I'm saying? I'm buying energy
It's-
today and
It's a 20-year commitment, but
For me.
correct. It's a 20-year commitment. You can get out of that commitment, however, by if you move, or you can also, I believe, you can transfer to somebody else. So there are ways out of the agreement, but there's specific reasons. You can just change your mind.
Any other questions?
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that was very, very interesting. I'm glad to hear about this. Thank you.
And thank you for your time. And just so to recap kind of the follow-ups, I'll get back regarding whether there's some way to reserve allocation. If there's some way we could do like a pre-sale, so to speak, I can find out. But as you commented, there are reams and reams of regulations that govern all of these programs. And if that breaks any of those rules, sorry, but I'll certainly let you know. And then for you on whether or not there's a franchise fee involved at all in the PPA.
There shouldn't be, because they're not using the cities right away.
Because of franchise
Well-
fees with Black Hills.
But the power is still being purchased by city residents, so that's why I wonder. I'd like clarification. I don't think we can assume.
Franchise fee is not a function of.
No, Well, it's not.
I don't-
It's not a franchise fee. It's a fee to the resident who has.
I don't believe there is, but
this
we'll just get it settled in black and white.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Effectively rent for using city streets for infrastructure.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, is there anything else from city council? Then this meeting's adjourned.